So then we go down, we have the liver, and the liver manufactures bile. It's almost its sole job is to manufacture bile to digest fats. Now the liver's become a filter. It's become like a kidney. It filters out poisons in the blood and stores them in the liver. That's not the liver's job. We're not supposed to be meant to be toxic like that. The liver makes bile. We have a lot of excess bile that stores in the gallbladder. The gallbladder doesn't manufacture anything. The gallbladder holds bile. Now, why do we need a gland, an organ that holds bile? Because when we were living outdoors or slaughtering an animal, we'd eat sometimes 10 pounds of fat in a day because you had to eat it fast or other animals wouldn't eat it. So where would you get the bile? The liver can only produce bile enough to digest a pound of fat a day. And if you're eating 10 pounds in 24, 48 hours, your liver's not going to do it. You're going to have diarrhea and you're going to pass out most of your fat. It's just going to run out of you. So you've got this gallbladder that holds that excess bile. So you can eat lots of fat at a time. If you have good bile, well-produced bile. Then we have the pancreas, a very important organ, gland. They say, the pancreas is there to convert crude carbohydrates into glycogen with the aid of the insulin that it produces. So the body makes glycogen, the nervous system uses it, a lot of functions, and the body can use glycogen. However, in Columbia University's tests with glycogen, they found that people, when they used glycogen, had a byproduct called advanced glycation end product. And they found that stores in the human body at a rate of 70 to 90%. 70 to 90% for a lifetime. It stores in your body. A waste product that is a toxin that your body can't reutilize stores in the body, causing problems like yeast infections, funguses, athlete's foot, all kinds of problems, even gangrene. So you look at that sugar relationship and you look at the pancreas and say, wait a minute, before sugar came into being, humans didn't eat much sugar. If you've ever, but then they say, oh, fruits, they eat a lot of fruits. Where the hell are fruits? I lived outdoors for 3 years. The only time I ever came across fruit in the wild was very seasonal, very small patches, like blueberry patch or a very primitive strawberry patch. The strawberries are as big as a small marble, and they're as tart and as bitter as can be. They're not sweet. Only time I came across prolific amounts of fruit was when they were cultivated by man. So you look at this, there's not much fruit out there in the wild. There wasn't fruit being produced unless it was agriculturally produced. So they weren't eating all that sugar. So now we're getting all this inundation of sugar, so the pancreas has warped itself. But what is the pancreas made to do? To take the enzymes that are broken down from food to reassemble them in a structure that is right for the human body, send it back to the digestive tract. Very important very important function. Now, what happens when we eat cooked foods? There's no bioactive enzymes. So what is the pancreas doing? Pancreas creates hormones like insulin that goes out and leaches these nutrients from every cell in your body. So you've got this huge bank account that you start with in your life if you're relatively healthy. And each time you eat a cooked food, you spend some of it. So by the time you're 60 years old, your bank account's pretty gone. Pretty deficient. Because the pancreas has to go leach good active substances to go in there and utilize these crude structures of protein and fats that have been damaged, that have been cauterized from heat and chemicals to try to utilize that. It's like going into a junkyard and utilizing whatever you can to make a car. What is that car structure going to be like? Even if it starts off of a Rolls Royce, within 10 years, you're going to have a very weird machine. And all the old parts are going to get worse because you put an old part in, it makes the newer one, the original one, more damaged. And it keeps damaging the newer good stuff. So you end up with all broken down parts. And that's basically the structure of what happens when you eat cooked and processed foods. So the pancreas tries to minimize the toxicity and maximize the utilization of fats and proteins in the body to help strengthen and promote some kind of health in the body. And it does a phenomenal job because all of you are sitting here after having eaten a ton of crappy food and lots of chemicals and exposed to lots of chemicals. But then you see when you eat 60, 70, you start getting severe diseases. That usually means it's the end of your life. They're saying, they're sort of flashing up these statistics. Oh, we're living longer. We're living longer. Our medical, innovations have stopped diseases. We've stopped polio. Absolute hogwash. If you look in laboratory tests, you'll see the poliomyelitis is active in almost everybody alive. Polio is there. They're just giving it a different name so you won't know that it's polio. They're giving it an entirely different name. And because all bacteria changes genetic structure every 7 to 10 years, of course the poliomyelitis that we had back in the 50s when the polio vaccine came out is different than it is now, so they give it a different name. It's not polio anymore, when it's the exact same thing. We have people that are crippled the same way. Look at Guillain-Barré disease. It's polio terrifically advanced that hits the body and paralyzes it like that. It has the same biochemic structure and damage. So they haven't gotten rid of anything. When I lived outdoors, I slept in graveyards a lot because people would leave me alone in a graveyard. I wore robes like they did back in Jesus' time. And I had a beard and long hair. And, you look like Jesus in a graveyard, nobody's going to screw with you, So basically, I lived in a lot of graveyards in 3 years, or 2.5 years. And let me tell you, there were people very old, lots of tombstones. There were 102, 105, 106, 110. One even saw was 112. And in a graveyard, sure, you've got babies that died at birth. And this was back in a time when you didn't have air conditioning and you didn't have heat. Regular heat, these people would go to bed cold, and be in excruciating heat. And you had people that were living much longer than you look in the graveyards today. And the ratio of the death statistics. I mean, our rate of death in this country is higher than any other. Except in the countries that have been poisoned with Ebola and AIDS, like in Africa, that they put in the smallpox vaccine. Why do you think America funded 75 million vaccines? The UK, the British government, and the United States government funded 75 million smallpox vaccines. Every one of those Africans who got the smallpox vaccine got AIDS. Why did they do that? It's another warfare. It's another way you can take over the resources of a country without having to go to battle. And you do it quickly. And you also create what? Anybody here read the diaries of a financial hitman? What was it called? Economic hitman. Talks about how they'll run a country into debt. They can't pay it, so they take over the resources and the government. And the World Bank runs it. And who runs the World Bank? 12 families that run the world. So here you've given 75 million people in Africa, you've devastated it. And the British and American governments are saying, oh, we'll give you aid, we'll help you, we'll give you medications that don't work for this AIDS epidemic, and we'll keep giving you this, and you just keep killing off the people. And they say, oh, you can't pay the debt, then we'll have to take your resources. And that's the way it goes. So with all of that, everything that they're saying is untrue. I don't believe a word they say about anything. It's all manipulative. They're trying to get you to think it's okay. Our food system is okay, except for the bacteria in it. You have to have a poison towels. You have to have poison mattresses for your babies to lie on that are antibacterial. Cutting boards that are antibacterial. Rugs that are antibacterial. They put them in all airports because these people that fly over from Asia have got to bring terrible things here because they still have trichinosis in their intestines. Yet they're vibrantly healthy, but they're going to bring the bird flu over. Avian flu, what a joke. No animal can get a virus from another animal. You can't have that transference. It doesn't happen that way. Viruses are not alive. Viruses have no nucleus. They have no respiratory system. They have no eating system. All they do is disintegrate certain tissue, depending upon the virus. If something's not alive, how can it be contagious? You can put virus in a petri dish that is fertilized so cells can grow in it, and you put viruses there by themselves, not one more will be found. They'll have the same number a year later and under any temperature condition. Not one more will be found in that petri dish. As soon as you introduce live cells into it, all of a sudden the virus starts multiplying. And if you look at in a petri dish where the virus comes out, it comes out of the cell. The cell's manufacturing it. If you say, we manufacture Tide soap, right? So you have all these homes with Tide soap. Tide soap contagious? Saying virus is contagious is like saying Tide soap is contagious. You've got a cell that's in a toxic environment. It's fertile enough to keep the cell alive, but it's still a chemical environment. It's not a natural environment. It's not blood. It's not anything other than a toxic chemical soup. So these cells are not well. So they start producing viruses to clean themselves because they can't utilize bacteria, parasites, or fungus in an environment like that because those creatures are killed, destroyed. After chemotherapy, I couldn't get a bacterial cold anymore. I got flus only. Flu, the definitions years ago, 30 years ago, cold was predominantly bacterial. A flu was predominantly almost exclusively viral. Now they're mixing them up because there's almost no more bacteria involved. All we find are massive amounts of virus. But just remember, fungus, parasites, bacteria eat this dead tissue and reduce it to a small amount of waste for us to discard or utilize as nutrients in the body. When you've got a virus, you're talking about a solvent. You're talking about a soap. It's not alive. So what happens if you take a soap to clean off the garage floor? You put it in water, you dilute it, you clean up the grease on the floor with all the other garbage that's out there, and then what do you have? You have a bucket full of toxicity. Same thing happens in the human body. So you have massive swelling. You don't have any mitigation of the toxicity. So virus is not a happy way to detox. It is still a way to detox. And that's the way I had to detox up until 3 years ago. because of the chemotherapy and radiation. Anytime I would introduce, I ate parasites. One time I ate a pound of a salmon that was undulating with pinworms. I must have eaten a couple 100,000 of eggs, probably at least 2,000 of those pinworms. Had my feces and urine checked for 10 weeks after. Not one parasite. They couldn't sustain themselves in such a toxic body. Every time they'd eat a cell, it was damaged with chemotherapy or radiation or both, and all the other toxicity from the medication. It killed them. So, of course, they can't procreate in a situation like that, a poison environment. So then the body uses virus instead, because that's not alive, but cleaning it out. So that's why it was very, very long for me to get well. It took really 30 years for me to go from that cancerous place and all that medical therapy to a very strong, healthier place where I am now. And I got my, I'm trying to get parasites after I did those experiments with those animals that did very well as long as we fed them raw and let them maintain their parasites. The vitality and vibrance, even at autopsy, was astronomical. I mean, they were like kittens and puppies, 12, 15-year-old animals, like kittens and puppies, after they got rid of their parasites, after they rebuilt everything in such a short time. Bacteria, if they had to do it with bacteria, it would have taken a longer time. If they had done it with fungus, it would have taken even a longer time. But doing it with virus, it takes forever because there's so much toxicity involved in it. There's no changeover or neutralization of toxicity. It just dissolves it and fractionates all those poisons into a million other poisons. And your body has to wash it and flush it out of the system. It has to use nutrients to bind with it and eliminate it. So viruses are not alive. Viruses are not contagious. And you see the big news article in the New York Times and all of that? Getting ready to fight a new flu epidemic. So they got the avian flu already. And where did that avian flu? Now, how did they come up with 70 million doses of vaccine? 70 million doses of vaccine. Where did they come up with it? In a year and a half when they started making it. They can't make that many that fast. Think back, what happened with the swine flu? Does anybody remember the swine flu of the 70s? Everybody was going to get the swine flu that came from Asia. Asians are getting blamed for everything. So, or the Spanish flu. The Spanish did it. Always are coming up with some animal or some foreigner, to attack, because there's a natural prejudice against certain foreigners and against certain animals. So the swine flu, everybody was told the swine flu has trichinosis. Oh, that's a very bad animal. And any disease that it's going to give us is going to be really terrible. So they came up with the swine flu. President Ford went on TV and took the vaccine and said, look, it's completely harmless. Who was our vice president? David Rockefeller. What did his whole family was invested in? Pharmaceuticals. Who got the $7 billion contract to make the swine flu? Rockefellers. And did you see him get the swine flu on TV? Nope, not at all. He talked his crony, who was president, into taking the swine flu on TV. Now, I liked Ford. He was a very peaceful man, to an extent. He didn't, he wasn't hard like the others, but he was still a politician. So what happened? We had two people in the United States that caused a turmoil. Dr. McBean, a female MD in San Diego, and Ida Honoroff, who was a famous consumer advocate and syndicated in 183 different radio shows throughout the United States and some even internationally. They both said the swine flu is a hoax. The swine flu is another vaccine that's full of mercury, formaldehyde, ether, aluminum, and what was the other one? Detergent. With this bacteria that was grown on eggs. It is a toxic substance. Nobody should get it. And you're talking about a consumer advocate and MD making a lot of noise. And the way they made the big noise, they filed suit on the CDC, President Ford, and Rockefeller, and the the Surgeon General, filed suit on all of them. What happened? They made a noise, so the press was there at the poll stations waiting for people to have all kinds of bad reactions, and guess what happened? They did. 2,100 people died in the first 2 weeks. So they pulled the vaccine, and it's been in the storage vaults. $7 billion that you and I paid for in the vaults. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year to vault that. So what happened when the smallpox vaccine came out? How did they make 75 million smallpox vaccines in a few months for these people in Asia? They were pulling out the swine flu, selling it as smallpox, and then injecting it with AIDS, which was created at UCLA in 1961. UCLA was created in UCLA in 61. They took the leukemic virus from a bovine and the lymphonomic virus from a sheep, and they combined them, spliced them together, and they created what was called the AIDS virus. Dr. Strecker, Robert Strecker, found that out. He was hired by an insurance company in San Francisco that was about to insure a company that was 60% homosexuals. They wanted to know the rate, the quality, the structure, the longevity of anybody, and the likelihood of anybody who was homosexual getting AIDS, because that was the thing. AIDS was among the homosexual community. So he kept fractionating this. Now, when you have a virus structure before it does its work and disassembles something, it is a protein structure that, by its magnetic structure, its shape, and its chemistry, can go in and cause something to disintegrate. But it's very specific to certain tissue. But the pharmaceutical industry says, see what it's doing to this cell, and it only shows you that small picture. Yeah, it's disintegrating it to regenerate it. But it's a finite structure, just like when you go through a cold or a flu. It's not dissolving your whole body. It's dissolving certain structures in your pulmonary cavities. It's getting rid of certain toxicity in there. It's not going to kill you. It'll incapacitate you, certainly, but it's not going to kill you. But they'll make you think that it is, so you'll take their defenses against it, which are all horse manure. So guess where the other half of that swine flu, guess where the other half of the swine flu is going to be used? In the Asian avian flu vaccine. They've been, we already paid $7 billion for it, and then Bush last year spent $8 billion on the same substance. So pull it out of the vaults, remarket. Because it doesn't make any difference. Think about it. Viruses are not alive. So they're always going to be changing depending upon what's in the cell. A virus that a body makes, one cell makes, 24 hours is going to be completely different because it needs to get rid of other structures within that system. It's taken apart some of it, it's healed it, discarded it. Now this whole process has to take maybe 10 structures apart to be able to get rid of all that contamination and rebuild itself and heal itself. So virus is always going to change. So in 3 days, you have viruses that look nothing like the virus that was in effect 3 days ago. And they're going to give you a virus that they say has been manufactured on a virus that existed 2.5 years to 3 years ago. They're making a virus for you to take that's already obsolete and it's extinct. I mean, I don't get how people can buy this shit. I really don't. It is insane. I mean, your MDs out there, you think that they have good minds. They can absorb all this nonsense, this bad chemistry, and they have good minds to be able to absorb it, but they don't have wise minds. They don't have practical minds. They don't have rational minds. It is an absolute absurdity to say that viruses are contagious. 30 years ago, doctors were told never to give an antibiotic to somebody who had a viral anything, a viral infection, because they were worthless. Viruses aren't alive. Now they're administering antibiotics like crazy for anything that's viral. And they're saying that viruses are contagious. I don't get it. I really don't get it at all. I mean, it's like we're living in a stupid world. I'm not talking ignorant. I'm talking stupid.